Well, let's get more on this. Also from Washington, D.C., Jamal Abdi is a policy director at the National Iranian-American Council. Thank you very much for being here today. As Shihab is saying, this is a very serious issue, but what do you think is happening behind the scenes? What's behind all this back and forth? Is Trump looking for some kind of ratcheting up the pressure, kind of like North Korea style, and then a reconciliation?
Well, I'm not sure about the last part of that. This administration is clearly ratcheting up the pressure. Trump left the Iran nuclear deal, and there's clearly a campaign that is being unveiled that is going to be paired with an escalation of sanctions and pressure on U.S. allies to leave the Iranian market. I think the question that you raised, though, is what is the end point here? And I'm not sure that this administration has one. I think there are some in the administration who think that Iran is on the brink of collapse, and with some clever propaganda and a few speeches by Mike Pompeo, they are going to really put the Iranian regime at the risk of actually toppling. I think for those like John Bolton, this is actually about escalating the provocations, making it difficult for the Iranians, and daring Iran to really respond so that this smokescreen that the U.S. is not interested in war or regime change can be lifted, and the administration can move towards potential military action. So I think that there are some competing interests here.
You talk about increasing support, international support for the U.S., but given the fact that the U.S. left the nuclear deal against the likes of the U.K. and France, how much international support do they really have about turning the screws on Iran?
That is a big part of the equation that is missing for the Trump administration. I think that Donald Trump is testing how much he can really bully not just U.S. adversaries, but U.S. allies. And we already see the Europeans and the other parties to the nuclear deal, essentially the entire international community, save a few of the countries in the Middle East, pushing back on this approach. And the Europeans have taken measures to try to ensure their companies continue to invest in Iran in accordance with the nuclear deal, because their concern is that if Iran leaves this deal, then you have the nuclear threat back on the table. So I think that Trump is going to get a lot of pushback from them. I think that he's not going to find a lot of support from other countries. And so, again, it's a question of who is Trump trying to appeal to? Do they think that they're going to convince the Iranian-American community, who Secretary Pompeo is reaching out to, or the Iranian people to line up behind this policy? I don't see any takers. And so it's going to become a matter of how much is the U.S. going to invest in this and how much is the U.S. willing to lose.
Speaking of Pompeo, he very clearly gave support to protesters there, essentially trying to weaken the government's position, saying that the U.S. will back them in any way they can. Will this have any effect in Iran?
I think this actually undercuts what this administration is trying to do. I think that, you know, what Pompeo raised, there are legitimate grievances about the Iranian government's corruption and violations of human rights and the economic situation, which is due in part to the Iranian government, but also in part to U.S. sanctions. The problem here is the messenger. And I think when you have Pompeo coming out and trying to sort of, I guess, be the good cop, which is a relative term in this case, and then you have Trump coming out right afterwards and making it very clear, no, this could end in a military confrontation. I think what that does is it actually feeds those in Iran who feel very comfortable in a confrontation with the United States. Remember, you know, much of the establishment in Iran pushed back against what Rouhani did with Obama in negotiating that nuclear deal. He really went out on a limb to do that, and this, you know, exchange and dialogue is not necessarily something that the system is very comfortable with. Now what Trump and Pompeo are doing is sort of in attempting to put pressure on Iran is speaking to what Iranian leaders are best at, which is trading barbs and insults with the United States. The trouble is that one of the reasons that Obama went and negotiated that nuclear deal was we were reaching sort of the end point of this game of chicken, where military confrontation was becoming very likely. And it's hard to see how this administration finds an off-ramp. If they think they're going to repeat what happened in North Korea, I think the situation is so different that they're in for some unforeseen consequences.
Very interesting. Jamal Abdi from the National Iranian-American Council, thank you for your thoughts.